That's basically all the Portuguese I know. So I'm just waiting for my slide to come up, and then we'll get started. But I hope you enjoy it already right here. I love the slide as well, but still waiting for my machine to come up. Let me try to unplug and plug the machine. That's okay. Oh, it's on your side. Fine. Okay, okay. Then we just wait another few minutes. Sure. It's morning. Let's keep it easy. I love that intro. Thank you. Appreciate that. So again, just a false start. Again, good morning or bom dia. Yeah, okay. That's the only Portuguese I know. The rest will be in English. But we have to start with one very, very important question. How important is security to you folks? Who thinks security is an important thing? Who actually does something with security? That's what I thought. Like, yeah, it's important, let's do something with it. No, we've got the security team to do that for me. Why should I care? I'm a developer, correct? But the main question I have to ask you next, like, yes, we think security is important, but who of you has ever been hacked or breached or was part of a data leak or... first of all, I'm getting it recorded, you're not getting it recorded, so your boss doesn't see your hand is up. That's fine. A few of you. Well, let me tell you, I had this one time in band camp now. I had this one time where actually I had to say to my boss, like, hey, dude, I'm sorry. We have a security breach. And I will tell you briefly what happened, because I think that is the main story how I came into security and gives a great perspective of why this thing is important. I was working at a small startup which was part of a bigger bank. And we had to fight for budget for next year. Keep that in mind, because that's very important, because there's pressure on your shoulders, right? Get that feature out immediately, because we don't have funding for next year, and maybe we, yeah. So that was the staircase. Thing was, we built an application, and that application was basically an application to search for houses on the market. It was a couple of years ago. And what you can do on your mobile device, you go in there, you don't need to authenticate or do anything, but we created a profile for you automatically, and that was based on your device. So UUIDs generate that, and that profile was there just to keep your settings in. If I looked for condos instead of for houses, or I want apartments on the first floor with a window, something like that, these preferences. That's what we stored in your profile, and that was bound to your machine. I think we kept the ID somewhere on the machine itself. So we have a profile service that can get the profile by ID, because that was on your machine, and the profile gets back. Nothing serious, because you just search around the database. Fine. At a certain point in time, and you might recognize this, you build a small proof of concept, and then your manager comes up like, hey, let's add another feature. And then you think, but this was a proof of concept. Not the best thing. And you know, MVPs or tests are never real tests when they're in production. They're like, let's keep it there, and if it works, let's build something on top of it. So we built a next thing. And the next thing was we need to build, not only you could search for a house, but you can also put houses into the database saying, hey, this is my house, it's for sale, it's on an official website for sale, but you can match it with people's searches, and if you have things in common. So for that, we said, like, okay, we connect your profile to the database in the Netherlands that contains all the buildings. houses, all buildings that are, and that data is open. Okay, fine. So we build a property service. But as part of that, you can claim a property as that house is mine. But if I claim it, you cannot claim it anymore. That was the logic behind it. All fine. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that we added the profile service and that there's now a secure login with an email address, right? My profile, my house can only be claimed once. So far, so good. So we have profile, we have that property, so the house. You know what the problem was? This was still there. You could still, and that was a feature request, you could still log in anonymously with that UUID. But there was also a find all properties by the property service. Because we needed to create the REST endpoints to throw it back to the application, to the app, the mobile app, what we did, we also just serialized the property. You know what's in the property? A UUID, which is the UUID that connects the property to the profile. Bad thing is that if somebody, you don't need the UUID for the front end. But if you do a raw REST request, then that whole property comes back with the UUID. You take that UUID out, you set get profile by ID, you get the profile information, and now you have a physical address where somebody lives connected to an email address. Email address normally consists of first name dot last name at provider dot whatever domain. So you connect PII data to physical data, which means you have a data breach. And that is because we just had to make this fast. So we had to come back to our product manager and said, hey, we have a data leak. Sorry. You know what the first reaction was? Upper level management comes up to you and say like, I'm a bit disappointed that our developers are not security aware. The day before he was like, rush this thing out because we need funding. That's where the problem is. The thing is, we live in a world where we are feature-based. We look at features and security is like, if we don't get breached, it's all fine. You know what the fix was for this? Took me 4 minutes, including deploying. I'm a Java developer, and I also only had to do this. We used Jackson to deserialize it into JSON, and I just had to add Jackson ignore to the UUID, ship it again, all fixed. The aftermath of filling in paperwork cost me months. So it's not so much a technical problem, it's more that a lot of people are not aware that within development we need to take care of this. I'm Brian. I am a staff developer advocate. I still don't know what that means. It means I program a little and email a lot. Probably. I don't know. That's basically my work. Java champion, do some stuff in the community. I lead the Netherlands Java user group and the virtual Java user group. We were virtual before it was cool, together with Roberto, by the way, and some other stuff. But that's not important, because we need to face a problem. And what is that problem? Well, basically, we deliver software far faster than we used to do before. Back 15 years ago, when I worked for the Dutch government, we deployed 3 times a year. That is great, because I can do a bunch of stuff, nobody cares. And then after 3 months, they try to put it in production, they have a lot of time to pen test, and it's all fine. Or they come back with me with a list of defects. Before I joined Sneak, the company I work for now, I worked at basically a competitor of Amazon. Not the Amazon Web Service, but the vending, the e-commerce platform. We deployed my service 3 to 4 times a day. Good luck with pen testing. When you're done pen testing, I'm already 14 iterations ahead of you. So that's not possible anymore. However, we see that there is a lack of security if we are trying to program. We work feature-based. And that manager's breathing down my neck again. Get that feature out today. So I cut corners. I'm like, yeah, sure, fine, you're paying the bills, right? And what we see is, we try with DevOps, we try to tear down a wall between developers and operations. But security is still a siloed expertise. One security team managing a lot of development teams. And the development teams are everlasting growing. More development teams, one security team. How does that scale? Not. But the thing is, we just need to play along. We need to play together. Because if I cowboy around, eventually my security manager comes up to me and says like, dude, really, again? Or the other way around, if my security manager or my security engineer says to me like, you cannot deploy this, I'm like, I need to make sure that that feature was out yesterday. So that collides. And if we're colliding, we're not cooperating, and in the end, that means that probably we end up losing customer data, and that is something we do not want. So, sure, Brian, how bad is that situation? First question, who of you is a Java developer? Or heard of Java, been to Java, drinks Java? Okay, a ton of you. Do you know what Java is? Amazing. You know what we do? We create back-end applications in Spring Boot. Right? We make Uber jars. Everything is in there, and we deploy it. Great. But do you know what's in there? Yes, my Spring Boot starter web. What does that include? Right. Well, you include a lot with Spring. Sure, let's come back to that later. But first, if we look at security, we probably look at your own code, right? We're very proud of our own code. So I created my first REST endpoint, and hopefully you can see it. If not, I will help you through it. It's basically just a get mapping to /hello, and it says something. I already made my first mistake. Who sees the first mistake? One person. Thank you. You're clever. Love that. This is the problem. The problem is I have a request parameter that is a user, and without doing any form of validation or sanitization, I just push it into the output writer, which technically means whatever somebody puts in that URL, if it's JavaScript, it's getting executed, because I'm not doing anything with it. So, oh, that was too fast. So the thing is, if I put something in like script alert 1 or even worse, it's not something we want. Okay, you probably will find this when you do something like code reviews. Who does code reviews? Okay, the rest of you does pair programming. Okay, we keep that to them. It's fine. It's good. So we did code reviews, and at least somebody in this room found this. Thank you. Appreciate you. Next one. What's the problem here? I'm trying to upload a file. This is just, if you look at the internet and you search for Spring Boot uploading file through a form, you probably get more or less this code. This is the problem. File.get original file name. And that comes from a multi-part file. That multi-part file is just a POJO representation of a file, and that file is just an HTTP request. So I blindly trust, again, that HTTP request, get the original file name out, and that's where I put it, upload folder /file name. And then you again, yeah, sure, why? What's happening? Well, what if I change my HTTP request, and it's quite simple, and change it to something like this? Then I traverse back out of the system, go into somewhere else, and override maybe a file that you're not intending to override. And this is easily possible. I will not demo the actual hack because then I need to install a proxy. But this is pretty hard to find. So if I have my IntelliJ over here, maybe I should put it to light mode. That's probably easier. It's not my favorite mode, but you probably see it better if I put it in light mode. Hey, light mode. Ooh, damn, light. Anyway, I'm coding in my application, and I have a scanner here. And obviously, this is the scanner from my company, and it does very fast static analysis. And it says to me here, yay, you've got a path traversal issue on line 69. Cool. It starts file controller line 39 to 69. So let's look at this. And this is actually basically the code I showed you. I'm using the file.get original file name. So by changing that, by doing things like, hey, what does it say over here? Oh, this is a little bit weird because I changed my thing. Like, hey, maybe we should look at the canonical path, so where the path reverses to. Or here, maybe you should normalize the path before you actually use that. So you see, if I normalize this, maybe, I'm not sure, normalize. Now you can see it. If I normalize that path, the dot dot slash will get cut out, or at least you know what the normalized path is. You can compare it to where actually, if it starts with the upload folder, and then push it. I never thought of that until I created this demo application. So that is something, it might be easy to find out whenever you're coding from the get-go in your IDE instead of waiting for your security team to come back. Saves me a lot of time, a lot of problems, and a lot of headaches. But okay, hey, we do code reviews, right? But code reviews in most cases look like this. 10 lines of code, I find a dozen of issues. But if I work for 3 months on my application, looks fine to me. Or it's more like, hey, who do you pick for your code reviews, right? Is it the person that is actually able to review your code, or is it that junior in your team? Because we've got 20 minutes until we need to push this to production. Hey, junior, look at this code. I worked for 3 weeks on it. Just say yes, it's fine. We are compliant, right? So code reviews are a good thing, but depends on who you pick and who is capable of doing that and how much time you grant that person to do the code reviews. So the thing what we need is we need to be, basically we need to be aware that these things happen. We need to have the knowledge how to deal with these things, and we need action. So don't sit there and sleep. Wake up. Make sure that you actually know what's happening by being educated, for instance, making sure that you're aware that you're also responsible for this, and take the proper action, maybe on forehand and not after your security manager comes up to you and say like, yeah, mistake, fix it. All right, we talked about your code, the code that you wrote, but that code is 10 to 20% of the binary that you put into production. The rest is, you guessed it, Spring Boot. Your open source dependencies, because your Spring Boot starter or whatever package in whatever ecosystem you use, what you pull in, a package or a framework, puts in another framework or another package and another package and another package. I did a tweet once, I think it was a couple of years ago, when I created a Spring Boot application with Spring Initializer, created a hello world REST endpoint, and said, okay, I wrote 4 lines of code, and now I count the lines of code that are actually in the jar. It's over 4 million. And guess what? You're not responsible for the 4 lines of code that you wrote. You're responsible for the whole jar. So what you implicitly take in is also interesting. Let me take you back to 2017. That is before COVID existed. And there were still dinosaurs. Company called Equifax, based in Atlanta, Georgia. They do crediting scores for the American banking industry. But what happened is they built their application at that point on Apache Struts 2. Now you would say, who the hell uses Apache Struts nowadays? Sure, gotcha, but 2017. Let's say their business logic, their code, their own code was perfectly fine. But because they were using Apache Struts 2, a vulnerable version, and that was already in production, and they probably just looked at their Jira board and like, hey, what's the next task that I need to do? Like we all do. What happened is, they used a vulnerable version of Apache Struts. People could get in, snoop around, figure out some data, and over 140 million US customers were compromised. It took them 76 days. And the nice thing is, the breach was in May. The fix was already out in March. Oops. So the question to you is, do you look whatever is in production, or do you just look at your next task? Let me just give you an example how easy it was to breach this. I have this application. This is a Java application, and it runs on Heroku. So it really runs on the internet. Hopefully, yes, my connection is great. Conference Wi-Fi normally sucks, but this one is great. So what I can do, as a real hacker, you normally put your hood on. You don't go into the browser. You go into the terminal. Terminal, ta-da. What I can do a curl request using a specific header. This is the header. And I don't need to figure this out. This is published. It's basically a content type. Who recognizes this content type? Who recognizes it? Come on. No, I'm kidding. This is an incorrect, invalid content type. Does not exist. And that's the whole reason. Invalid content type, using that vulnerable Apache Struts package, you go into an exceptional flow. And in that exceptional flow, for some reason, don't ask me why, you were allowed to utilize OGNL, the Object Graph Navigational Language, which is an expression language in Apache Struts. And that means I can interfere with objects that are already in memory, or even worse, I can create new objects. We have a bunch of Java programmers over here, so you know what this does. Creating a new process builder. I say to the process builder, start up the bash, and give that bash my arbitrary command. And then I reroute my output stream to an input stream to show it on screen. So basically, I create myself an arbitrary code execution mechanism. Great, let's try this. Let me... I must have my strut exploits. Let's do this one. I will explain to you in a second what I'm doing. So I'm using that header, and I make a substitution. That word command goes out, and I put the word env in, basically showing me the environment variables. Maybe I should make it a little larger so you can actually see it. Right? So env goes in. Let's give it a curl request and put it to a local. It's not on localhost. It's on Heroku, because that's way more fun than do it on a local host. So let's try this command on my Heroku machine and see what's happening. Oh God, these are the environment variables, at least partially, which means the env command executed on my Heroku pod. And the environment variables, boo-hoo, how important is that? Well, now I know where the Java home is. Okay, fine. But the thing is, if I can do env, I might be able, depending on what the privilege of the user are, able to create a file with some content, a script. Come back tomorrow, execute that script. Good luck in your post-mortem to find out what the heck happened. That's a pain in the butt, definitely. So because I can do arbitrary code execution, I now have a range of possibilities. By the way, Heroku basically is a Docker container. What is the basic user if you create a Docker file and you create a Docker container? What user does it run in? Root. Right? It's super fun. Okay, but this was 2017. We're way past that, right? We're way, way past that. Help me out. Where were you? December 10th, 2021. Some people are like, what happened? Really? December 2021, that was my first day of vacation, and I actually tried to pack my bags. Guess what? That did not happen. Somebody decided to expose that there was a problem in Log4j, and I'm like, who uses Log4j? Well, apparently, even if you look at our own customers, almost 60% use Log4j as a transitive dependency. They did not know they were using it, because somewhere there was a library deep down below that uses it. 17,000 packages on Maven Central were compromised, and there were over 800,000 attacks, mostly automated, in the first 72 hours. How much of them succeeded? We don't know, because nobody told us. But it was an issue. Who worked on Log4j and who saw his Christmas going bad? At least a few of you. I feel your pain. I feel your pain. The thing was, briefly explain it. I know that part of you don't already know what's happening, but this is my child drawing of how Log4j works. Easy. I have an application, and if I know that something is logged, for instance, I'm trying to log in with a username and a wrong password. You probably have a log line like user Brian attempt failed, right? So if I know that my username is filled, I can use that to create such a string as this. This does a JNDI lookup. And a JNDI lookup basically does not only look at something, but retrieves the object. And I could, for some reason, combine that with the LDAP protocol. Great, because it's quite easy to set an LDAP server myself. So what this does with the $, it actually executes whatever is in there and tries to do the lookup to the LDAP server, which I own. Okay, so I own that LDAP server, evil.com. I wish I had that domain. I could make money out of that. And I return a pointer to where actually that file is. And that file is a precompiled file that I serve on HTTP. And it's a precompiled file, and if it goes into your system, it initializes and it executes a side effect. And that's what where the problem is. Because if my evil.class that I precompiled and served to you looks something like this, I hope you can see this. It says implement object factory, and then basically if you implement the object factory, you need to override the get object instance. And what I do now is say, hey, open -a calculator. So let me show you that it actually works. I have an application over here, and if I, oh, let's put my one password out because, or else my boss would get really mad at me. Manage extensions, yes. Cut this one off. All right. Reload this. Cool. So let's do something like my name, Brian, and password doesn't matter. If I sign in, you will see at the bottom, and over here, that my username gets printed. Right? You see my username gets printed. Great. I have my LDAP and my HTTP server running here, which actually, I just stole that code from the internet, and I created that evil class. So it runs on port 99999. It's almost German for no, 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 no. So let's connect to that server. Let's connect to that LDAP and give it any given password. Then that file that I just showed you pumps in, gets executed, and ta-da! My calculator spins up. And now you say, that's fine if you want to calculate things. But if I can do this, I can use this to create a connection from your machine to my machine. I just have to listen to a port and make a reverse shell attack. Because you initialize it. You are initializing the contact from your machine. And then I can take over because, hey, we were in a Docker container and we were root. Great again. Again, a very easy way to do arbitrary code execution because you were simply using that library. And you weren't aware of it. So updating these libraries are super, super important. If this is your code, or this is your binary, this is the jar you put into production, pretty much this is the code you wrote. And we all agreed just yet that we take good care of that code by doing reviews and the rest of you pair programming. But how do you take care of that yellow spot? Do you actually have things in place? Do you scan these libraries? Do you know what's in there? Do you actually know how many class files are in your class path? I don't. But attackers are targeting these open source libraries as well. Because they're open source, it's quite easy to look at the source code. That's the whole reason. Obviously, the average count of dependencies per project is different. We don't have a lot of dependencies in the average Java project, but we do have a lot of dependencies in JavaScript. That means in JavaScript there are Node.js, let's take that as an example, there are a lot of smaller dependencies. A package like is odd or is even. I'm always wondering, why is that a dependency? You could write that in a one-liner, but sure. However, if you look at the average count of vulnerabilities by language, there's a lot. Not saying that every vulnerability is actually exploitable. It depends on settings, it depends on configuration, it depends on how you use the library. But it is a library that has a possible exploit in it. Well, we can go on and on like, how concerned are you, but let's skip that. The thing is, your question is, who should be responsible for security? Is that the developer? Is that the security team? The operations folks, or the DevOps folks, I should say nowadays, or somebody else? We asked that in our survey, our state of open source security. And it's basically combined. We, as developers, need to take their fair share. Not only for our software, but also for our infrastructure. Our what? I will come back to that in a second. So again, it comes back to awareness, knowledge, and action. We need to be aware that these things are happening. Look at your binary. Look whatever you pull in. Do you need that library? Look at if that library is actually needed. Does it have enough maintainers? Is it the latest version? Does it have a security vulnerability that is already reported? And take probable action to make sure that if there is something in it that could harm you, switch it out for either a newer version or something else, or write it yourself. So we spoke about code, open source, but let's get to the next layer that's under the hood, your container. You probably write Docker files. Who writes Docker files? Who writes other container files? Nobody. One. Podman, I assume. But a lot of us write Docker files because nowadays it's not just a jar. You might need to give it an environment. It needs to run in a specific environment with some specific binaries on an ecosystem or, say, on a Linux distribution, whatever. What is the first line you put in a Docker file? First line. From. From. Yes, from. Which from do you take? I looked at the, normally you could say from Ubuntu or from Debian, and most people don't matter to put a tag on it or to put a specific hash on it. Like, just from, it works, right? If it works on my machine, ship it. We looked at Docker images. I just did that a couple of weeks ago. The basic images for OpenJDK, Node, Python, and whatsoever, to see what the vulnerabilities are in the operating system layer. These were the results. Well, guess what? The problem is not Node or Python or OpenJDK. The problem is the layer on top of that, because that is also based on something else. Just like your dependencies, you're just blindly trusting somebody else's container that is there on a registry. The latest Node version is based on a full-fledged Debian distribution. Do you need that for your tiny microservice? Probably not, because it brings in a lot of binaries, comes into your system, and these binaries can be playing a part in an attack chain. Trust me, they will, well, most of the time they will not be directly hit. But if there is something like that arbitrary code execution that I can use to spin something off, that spins something other off, it can be part of that chain of attacks. On its own, it might not be vulnerable directly because it's not reachable. But hey, if I can come in and I'm already root, I might be able to, you already provided me a bunch of tools from the operating system that I can misuse to take over your whole system and try to rule the world. So the thing is, the Docker image is an important thing. So you saw this application, but I have this same application on my local machine, as you can see here. Well, actually, it's not on my local machine. It's in a Docker container. And it's running here. That's cool, but let me show you the Docker container. And I will enlarge this in a second, just like this. So what I'm doing here, I'm using a multi-stage build. And I'm building my application using Maven 3 JDK 8 Slim. Fine, building the artifact. And then basically I'm copying the artifact to my second stage, which is a Tomcat server. I needed this because this is an old, what I said, Apache Struts 2 based application. So I need a web server. So I'm using Tomcat 8.5.21. Guess what? There's a problem in 8.5.21 because it's way old. One of the problems it has is this. And yes, I love arbitrary code executions. Let me look at what the problem is. It's basically explained over here. It was possible to upload a JSP file, Java server page file, to the server via a specially crafted request. This JSP then could be requested, and the code in it could be executed. So I don't need to touch your application. I just attack your Docker container because you're using an outdated Tomcat version. Luckily for me, I'm going to my favorite database, which is the exploit database. And the exploit database already has something for me, which is a Python script. And if I run that Python script, it does two steps. The first step is it creates that specially crafted request and creates a JSP file with this content. Basically, an out.println to see if it executes with all A's. If that works, I could go to the second phase by creating a JSP file containing a form with a submit button and a text file, or a text box. And every time I hit submit, it just says runtime.get runtime and execute the command you basically gave me. So I'm creating myself a web shell. Just to show you, this does not yet exist, and the other one also does not yet exist. So let's spin this up. I'm just attacking the container nowadays. Over here, let me enlarge this. So let's do check. This is the first thing, and it says to me here, it's vulnerable. Cool. Vulnerable, so that means over here, it now has all the A's. Let's try the second one. It says to me, uploading web shell. Let me try here. Let me refresh this. And now I have a text box. Guess what? I'm root. So I can basically now go around and play with this because I now created myself a web shell while the application is still running. Again, I didn't touch your application. Your application is A-OK. You just used the wrong Docker container. And you could have known if you scanned this either locally, and I scanned it locally here in a CLI. Again, my own tooling, yes, obviously. But what it says to me here, and hopefully we can enlarge it big enough, it says all the individual problems, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's all fine. But what it says to me here is, hey, I'm using, maybe I should make it larger, yes. Here it says you're using base image 8521, which has over 735 vulnerabilities. Maybe if you just want to do a minor update to 8.5.88, you get back to 30 without any criticals. So that's already a big improvement. If I would rebuild my Docker container with this thing, I don't have this exploit anymore because it was fixed. But most of the time it was like, hey, it is there in production, it runs. Actually, no team is owning this anymore, so I don't dare to touch it because so many customers are depending on it. Recognize that? No, right? No. You were all working in innovative companies that are updating this every single day. But it means it also makes sense to sometimes update your container without your application is actually changing. Because the containers and the base containers, base images, are getting updated on a regular basis, hopefully, depending on what you choose. Maybe you should create your own base container, but hey, I'll leave that up to you. Anyway, it's a thing we need to take care of. Last but not least, at the bottom of the pile, we have infrastructure as code. Who uses Kubernetes? Yeah, what's the main problem in Kubernetes? YAML. Yes, exactly. Now, the thing is that misconfiguration in these kind of things. Hey, my pod has elevated privileges. I have a storage that is not only inward-facing, but also outward-facing, which shouldn't be using there. Like, these kind of things are also a problem in your pile because your Kubernetes files or your YAML files or your Terraform files are now part of your repository, and you do DevOps and you're agile and stuff. Again, it's about awareness, knowledge, and action. We need to be aware that there's more to than just your code and your dependencies. Make sure that you actually take action in that by knowing like how to look at, for instance, Docker containers. I need to update them and actually do that. Make sure that you provide the actions and you know what actions you need to provide. For instance, hey, you're using this base image, maybe update to this one. Might be helpful. So that is all the technical stuff. But how do I get this in place in my company? We probably all agree that this would be great if we're all working like that. But, you know, I work for the government, or I work for a bank, and we're very conservative. And how do I get this thing back? Because the first thing is not pushing in tools. I can push in all the tools in the world I want, but if you're not willing to use them, it doesn't work. Who was there at Nate's keynote? It's about culture. And this is the same. But how to change this kind of thing? Say we're all willing to change. How do I take the first step? Create a security champion program. And I know this sounds like a hype word, but let me get into the details. Yes, this is the marketing term for it. But the thing is that we try to tear down the wall between developers and operations and create a DevOps teams. We bring security from outside the team to inside the team. And how do we do that? Well, say we have one security team serving many engineering teams. And that's what typically happened. Security nowadays comes at the end, and you get a list of defects. Fix this. And your security team is like, said, nope. Or yes, yes sir, whatever. Why not make sure that we already apply these practices from the get-go? One thing you can do is have somebody in your team, just like your DevOps engineer, but now an engineer, and that's the first and foremost important thing, that is security aware. And I know this is utopia. It's probably not, you cannot just do this. But in the end, we would like to have somebody who is the liaison for the security team and basically proxies between the security team and tries to spread the knowledge and the word within the teams. That means this is still an engineer, but he gets updated by the security team what the new threats are or how to deal with certain things, and then teams can still operate autonomously. Basically what we did with DevOps. We're just trying to do the same trick again. And it can be one person, it can be multiple person, but let's try to get one person in each team, and that's already hard enough, that has a bit of security knowledge and tries to develop with that hat on, or reviews your code with that hat on. So if you want to create such a program, there are a few prerequisites that we need to think of. First of all, it needs to be purely developer focused. Not like, I am the security officer and I tell you what to do. No. Get one of the developers out. Ask him what their problems are. Because if I just demand things, like, hey, all tests should be green, the first thing I do is like, how can I get around these tests and still make them green? Because I need to deploy. So what are the problems that a developer has? And how does that contradict with security? And how can we help them? And think about it. Every tiny step that you get better is already better than yesterday. You don't have to be 100% yet. So think about what do developers want? There's no developer in the world that says, I want to create insecure software. Is there somebody in this room? If so, please get out. No, I'm kidding. But nobody wants to intentionally be insecure. But the problem is most of the time, hey, there's too much pressure, we need to do too much stuff, we don't have the right tooling. So look at what the problems of the developer are. Then next, make sure that you have executive sponsorship, which means from the top, C-level, director, VP, whatever you have in your company, but on the top. If the security officer on the top and the CTO do not agree with each other, we're done. If they both equally think security is important, should be integrated in each other's streamlines, then we have a chance. And if that streams down, then we might have a chance. Security should be just as important as code quality, or scalability, or maintainability. But if the CTO says, I don't care about that, make sure that this feature is out tomorrow, I'm cutting corners again, because my KPI is getting that feature out. So let's make sure that you have that. If that's not there, you're done. Again, it's about culture. Clear guardrails. We want teams to be autonomous. We want teams to do things autonomous, or else it's not manageable. Who works in an autonomous Scrum team, sprint team, whatever? Some people like, actually I want to, but not. Well, in general, we want that, thank you. I'm hoping that at least you have some autonomy, that you can do whatever you want, as in, I create the code because I think this is the best solution. We are the subject matter experts. So let's, instead of coming up with guidelines that you cannot have any vulnerability, let's come up with, hey, if there are vulnerabilities there, and they're up to a certain level, say low or medium, and you have a good reason to ignore that, you're fine. I trust you. If it's a high or a critical, let's look at it together to see if we need to fix this or not. And if there's still not a case, we can ignore it. So to some level, I can let my teams be autonomous. To some level, I would say, hey, let's make a decision together or company-wide that we need to do this. Again, clear guardrails. But also make sure that you have tools available that those people can find and fix these things themselves. Just like I did with my code reviewer or with my CLI that I just did to look at my Docker container. Constant coaching and mentoring. If we want this, there needs to be somebody available to that security champion or that liaison that if I don't know, or if there's new information coming up, help me, educate me. Because the most difficult problem is undereducated developers that do not know what security issues are. And that's no weird thing, because our cognitive load on all the other things, what new frameworks are there, what new techniques are there, how to do reactive programming, I still don't understand that. And cope with that is already occupying my brain. So coaching and mentoring is important. But this one, I think this one is the most important. Reward and recognize. Most of the times when, oh, let me go here that you actually can see it. Most of the times I work with an engineering, or with a security team, because I'm an engineer. It's more or less they come up with a list of defects. You need to fix this. What about you do it the other way? As in, hey, Team Alpha here did a great job. They fixed, like, there was a new vulnerability coming up. They fixed it within the 3 days, and that was within the boundaries that we asked them to do that. Hey, hooray, and show that out to the company. Then it's more of an achievement, like we created a new feature. You helped them improve security. If you do it that way, people are more inclined to actually do this. If you just come up with a list of defects, I probably, at some time in this universe, I smack your face, as in, stop bothering me. You get me? So it's tension versus collaboration. And recognizing that these things are just as important and take time and take effort, that is a good thing to do, and also might be helpful for somebody to grow in their career path. So, okay, these are the prerequisites, but what are good ways to start such a thing? Well, first of all, look at the teams in your company that have the highest risk. Might be a good way. Like if it's some weird small internal application, might not be your first candidate you look at. So which teams are at highest risk? Invest the most in them and go from that point. Again, every step you're better than yesterday is already a win. Look at the maturity of the team. If it's a team with 2 seniors and 6 juniors, they might not have the capability to do this, because most junior developers coming out of university or college or something like that do not really know the internals of security. I did not have such a thing at school. Who had education around security in their primary education, like on university or school or something like that? You see, virtually nobody. Yeah, 3 people, good. I want to know which schools that are. No, I'm kidding. No, but you see, that's a problem. We learn how to build things, not to break things. So, maturity level, if it's a team that's already there, for instance, worked on that application for years, it might be a good team to help them out, give them the new experience. Of course, if there are teams with existing relationships with the security team or have that security hat on, that's already great. And look at curious individuals, because first and foremost, this needs to be a voluntary thing. If you force this on people, this will not work. Because in the end, their primary KPI of a development team is creating stuff. But think about it. If you create things, we have our mouthful on clean code, on modular code, on code that is scalable and maintainable. Security should be one of these things as well. Clean code is secure code. Maintainable code is secure code. Or security should be one of the pillars on that. So in a lot of security talks, you will hear the phrase, we need to shift left. And with shift left, we mean from just before production, or your CI pipeline, shift it all the way left to your local machine. Like, hey, give people the tools like I showed you in my IDE. I scan my code and see it right away. I can fix it. That's great. But it also needs to shift up. As in, everybody in the company needs to know that it's not only about quality code and quality applications, but security is one of the quality standards in that. So it's not only shifting up left, it's also shifting up. It's basically a continuous loop. Because who works in a waterfall model nowadays? I'm just ignoring that one hand there. No, but most of the time, software development is not a project. There is no dedicated start. Well, maybe there is a dedicated start, but there's no dedicated end. Most of the times, it's like, hey, we created the first iteration, and now there's a new feature or a bug. And we continuously do that. So that means we need to do it in every step of the way. Bake in security. Scanning on your local machine, scanning in your CI pipeline. Make sure that that some things are automated. But first and foremost, be aware of these kind of things. So, as I told you, it's all about awareness. Know what you need to do. The knowledge, how to fix things or how to be actionable with that, and actually doing that as a developer, as in a development team. Because in the end, you do not want to be kicked in the nuts. This is all I have to say. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.